Some people will slowly destroy your peace while smiling at you. Have you ever noticed how certain behaviors become normal simply because they come from people we love, work with, or fear losing? Human nature works in a strange way. The more emotionally attached people become, the more they start tolerating what should never have been accepted in the first place. Disrespect, manipulation, humiliation disguised as jokes, control disguised as concern. And the dangerous part is this: most people do not realize the damage immediately, because toxic behavior rarely arrives with violence at first. It arrives gradually, quietly, almost politely, until one day, you no longer recognize yourself. I am the Watcher, and here, in Shadow Insight, we observe the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior. In this episode, you will discover why certain behaviors should never be tolerated, no matter who the person is. But more importantly, you will understand the psychological reason people often accept them for far too long. And once you see it, you may start looking at some relationships very differently. If these insights speak to you, subscribe to Shadow Insight, and tell me in the comments, what is one behavior you instantly lose respect for? Watch carefully. The first sign of psychological disrespect is not always aggression. Sometimes it is repetition. A repeated joke at your expense, a repeated dismissal of your feelings, a repeated habit of making you feel small in subtle ways. Have you ever noticed how some people constantly cross small boundaries, then act surprised when you react? They interrupt you, mock your ambitions, ignore your time, speak to you differently when others are around. And when you finally confront them, they suddenly say, "You're too sensitive. You take things too seriously. I was just joking." This is one of the oldest social manipulations in human behavior. The behavior hurts you, then your reaction becomes the problem. The strange thing about people is, many will test your limits before they respect them, especially when they sense emotional dependence. That is why certain unacceptable behaviors often begin in very ordinary situations. A friend who only contacts you when they need something, a partner who constantly compares you to others, a family member who humiliates you in public while pretending it is humor, someone who disappears when you struggle, but returns the moment your life improves. At first, the signs seem small, almost insignificant, but human behavior is built on patterns, and patterns reveal intentions over time. Have you ever wondered why some people slowly become more disrespectful the longer you know them? Because tolerance teaches people what they are allowed to do to you. The moment disrespect has no consequence, it quietly becomes permission. And most people never realize this until the behavior becomes unbearable. Why do people tolerate behaviors that clearly hurt them? Because human beings are not driven only by logic. They are driven by emotional survival. With time, you begin to notice something disturbing about human nature. Many people would rather suffer quietly than risk rejection. That is why disrespect is often tolerated inside friendships, relationships, families, and even workplaces. Not because the behavior is acceptable, but because losing the connection feels more frightening than losing self-respect. Adler believed that human beings constantly seek belonging and significance, and sometimes that need becomes so strong that people unconsciously abandon their own boundaries just to avoid feeling excluded. This is where manipulation becomes powerful, because manipulators rarely begin with cruelty. They begin with emotional confusion. One moment they validate you, the next moment they disrespect you. Then they become kind again. This creates psychological instability, and instability creates attachment. Have you ever wondered why some of the most toxic relationships are also the hardest to leave? Because the brain becomes trapped in unpredictability. A small moment of affection suddenly feels like relief. A simple apology feels enormous. Basic respect starts feeling like love. And slowly, the victim stops evaluating the behavior itself. They start chasing emotional relief instead. Freud once suggested that people often repeat familiar emotional patterns unconsciously. That is why someone raised around criticism, control, or emotional inconsistency may later tolerate those same behaviors in adult relationships without immediately recognizing the danger. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because the behavior feels psychologically familiar. and familiarity can easily disguise itself as love. This is why unacceptable behavior often survives for years, not through force, but through emotional conditioning. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Some individuals lose respect for you the moment they realize you will tolerate everything. Not everyone, but many. Human nature constantly observes limits. The way you react, the way you forgive, the way you remain silent. Watch carefully. Certain people do not interpret endless patience as kindness. They interpret it as weakness. That is why unacceptable behaviors tend to escalate over time. Disrespect becomes humiliation. Control becomes domination. Small lies become constant deception. Because once someone understands there are no real consequences, the behavior evolves. Have you ever noticed how some people behave perfectly at the beginning, then slowly reveal another side of themselves later? That is not accidental. At first, people present the version of themselves most likely to be accepted. But over time, their real emotional patterns begin to appear. The need for control, the jealousy, the resentment, the insecurity hidden behind charm. Jung believed that people hide parts of themselves they do not want others to see, their shadow. And sometimes, the shadow only emerges when comfort replaces effort. This is why some people become colder, more disrespectful, more manipulative after they feel emotionally secure around you, because they stop managing their behavior carefully. The strange thing about people is, many only respect boundaries they believe are real. Not spoken boundaries, real ones. A person who constantly insults you but never faces distance will continue. A person who lies repeatedly but always receives immediate forgiveness will continue. A person who humiliates you publicly while you remain emotionally available will continue. Human behavior follows reinforcement. What is tolerated tends to repeat itself. And this is where many people become trapped. They keep hoping the other person will suddenly become who they pretended to be in the beginning. But sometimes, the beginning was the performance, and the later behavior was the truth. But now, a more difficult question appears. What if the problem is not only the behavior, but also the silence surrounding it? Have you ever wondered why some people repeatedly attract the same kind of disrespect into their lives? Different faces, different relationships, same emotional pattern. Because tolerance can become unconscious. Many people think boundaries are something they explain, but real boundaries are something people experience. And when consequences never appear, human behavior adapts very quickly. The watcher has observed something strange over time. People often betray themselves long before others betray them. They ignore their intuition, excuse obvious disrespect, minimize humiliation, remain available after repeated dishonesty. Not because they are weak, but because they fear conflict, loneliness, or emotional loss. And slowly, self-abandonment begins to look like loyalty. This is why certain people become emotionally exhausted for years without understanding why. They continuously sacrifice their peace to maintain unstable relationships. Have you ever noticed how some individuals apologize constantly, even when they were the ones being mistreated? Because deep down, they have learned to prioritize emotional survival over self-respect. And once that pattern becomes normal, dangerous people recognize it immediately. They notice who struggles to say no, who fears disappointing others, who tolerates inconsistency, who remains accessible no matter how badly they are treated. Human nature always reveals itself eventually, especially around people who never enforce limits. But the deeper truth is this: every tolerated behavior slowly teaches your mind what you believe you deserve. That is why unacceptable behavior is dangerous, not only because of what others do to you, but because of what repeated tolerance slowly does to your identity. And one day, you wake up emotionally drained, surrounded by people who only learned your value through the limits you failed to protect. Most unacceptable behaviors do not destroy people immediately. They destroy them slowly, through repetition, through emotional confusion, through tolerated disrespect that gradually becomes normal. And the hidden truth behind all of this is simple. People often think tolerance preserves relationships, but in reality, unlimited tolerance usually destroys respect first. That is the revelation most people realize too late, because human nature responds to limits. Not only words, not promises, not intentions, limits. The moment someone someone understands there are no consequences for hurting you, the behavior often grows. And this is why certain behaviors should never be tolerated. Not because perfection is possible, but because self-respect disappears the moment everything becomes acceptable. Watch carefully. The people around you are constantly observing what you allow, what you excuse, and what you silently endure. And over time, those patterns shape every relationship in your life. The strange thing about people is, many spend years searching for respect from others, while abandoning it within themselves. I am the Watcher, and here in Shadow Insight, we reveal the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior. If this episode made you reflect differently about certain people in your life, subscribe to Shadow Insight, and tell me in the comments, what behavior do you believe people tolerate far too often today? Because the moment you stop protecting your boundaries, what exactly are people learning about your value?